My name is Sloane Hartwell. I'm 29 years old, and 6 months ago, my husband drove me to a remote lake house, told me to wait by the dock while he got something from the car, and then I heard the engine start and watched the headlights disappear down the road. He left me there. No phone, no keys, no way out. And when I finally made it back home 4 months later, I found out that while the world thought I was dead, he had already moved on. But what I found wasn't just heartbreak. It was something far worse. And before I tell you everything, please subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and leave your country in the comments. I love knowing where you're all watching from. Now let me take you back to the beginning. I used to think I was a good judge of character. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where everybody knew everybody and nobody really locked their doors. My parents were ordinary people. My mom taught third grade. My dad ran a hardware store. We weren't rich, but we were steady. That word, steady, it meant everything to me growing up. When I moved to Denver at 22 for a marketing job, steady was the thing I missed most. Cities are loud and fast, and they don't care about you. But I built something there. An apartment I was proud of, a small group of friends, a routine that felt like mine. My husband walked into my life at a friend's birthday party when I was 24. He was confident but not arrogant, funny without trying too hard. He asked me questions and actually listened to the answers. That was the thing that got me. Most people at parties are just waiting for their turn to talk. He wasn't like that. Or at least, he seemed like he wasn't. He had his own business, a logistics consulting firm, and he was doing well. My friends liked him. My parents liked him. My mom told me on the phone after she first met him, he has kind eyes. I held on to that for a long time. Longer than I should have. We dated for 2 years and got engaged on a hiking trip in Colorado. He proposed at the top of a trail, just the two of us. The mountains wide and quiet around us. I said yes before he even finished the sentence. The wedding was small, exactly what I wanted. A venue outside the city, white lights strung through the trees, 60 guests, all people who actually mattered to us. Everything felt right. Everything felt earned. The first year of marriage was good. I believe that completely. Looking back now, I can see the small things I ignored. He would sometimes go quiet for days, and when I asked what was wrong, he'd say nothing and move on. Like the silence had never happened. He became protective over his phone in a way he hadn't been before. He started taking solo weekends away for work trips that left no paperwork trail. But I explained all of it away. I told myself that marriage was adjustment, that privacy wasn't secrecy, that I was lucky to have someone who worked so hard. I had inherited some money from my grandmother the year before we got married. Not a life-changing amount to most people, but significant. $180,000. I had it in a separate savings account, but after the wedding, he suggested we consolidate our finances. It made sense, he said. We were a family now. One account, one future. I agreed. I transferred everything. I want to tell you that some part of me felt uneasy, that I hesitated. But the honest truth is I didn't. I trusted him completely. The second year of marriage is when things started to feel wrong in a way I couldn't rationalize away. He was different. Not dramatically different overnight, but like a slow leak. Something was emptying out. He stopped reaching for my hand. He stopped asking about my day. We could sit at dinner in total silence and he wouldn't seem to notice or care. When I brought it up, he turned it around. Told me I was too needy, too sensitive, that I looked for problems where there weren't any. I started to believe him. That's the thing nobody tells you about that kind of slow erosion. You don't notice you're losing yourself until you're already mostly gone. That September, he told me he'd rented a cabin near Lake Garner for our anniversary. 5 hours from Denver, tucked back in the trees, right on the water. He said we needed time away, just the two of us, to reconnect. I was relieved. I thought it meant he still wanted to fix things. I packed a bag full of hope. The drive up was quiet. He played music instead of talking. I watched the landscape change from flat highway to mountain highway to narrow dirt roads, and I told myself the quiet was companionable, that it meant we were comfortable with each other. I was still telling myself stories. We arrived late afternoon. The cabin was beautiful in that isolated way, wood-paneled and dark inside. The lake visible through the back windows, still and gray in the fading light. We made dinner together. He opened a bottle of wine and poured me a full glass, and himself almost nothing. I noticed but didn't say anything. We sat on the dock after dinner, watching the water. It was cold. He had his jacket on. I had mine. At some point he stood up and said he'd forgotten something in the car, and would I just wait a minute, he'd be right back. I said sure. I sat there looking at the dark water, thinking about nothing in particular. Then I heard the car door. The engine. The sound of tires on gravel going slow, then faster. I turned around. The headlights were moving down the driveway, and then they were gone, and I was alone in the dark by the lake, and my brain just refused to process it for a full 30 seconds. I stood up. I walked back to the cabin. The front door was locked. I didn't have a key. My phone was inside, and my jacket, which was inside on the couch. His wallet was gone. The car keys were gone. There was no landline. There was no neighbor within 2 miles. I want to describe the fear, but I'm not sure language covers it. It wasn't panic at first. It was something more like vertigo, like the ground had become unreliable. I walked around the outside of the cabin 3 times, telling myself there was an explanation, that he had driven to get gas or signal and he'd be back in 20 minutes. I waited on the porch for 2 hours. He did not come back. That first night, I slept in a garden shed I pried open with a rusted hinge tool. It had an old sleeping bag that smelled like mildew, and I wrapped myself in it and lay there with the thin walls doing almost nothing against the cold, and I thought about my mother. I thought about how she would feel if something happened to me. I thought about whether I had been stupid or unlucky or both. The next morning, I started walking. I knew the general direction of the main road because I had been watching out the car window on the drive-in. It took most of the day. I had no shoes appropriate for the terrain. My feet were blistered badly before noon. I fell twice on loose rock. I drank from a creek and told myself the risk was worth it. By late afternoon, I reached a 2-lane highway and flagged down a truck heading east. The driver was an older man, retired, heading to visit his daughter. He gave me water from a cooler and a granola bar and didn't ask too many questions, which I was grateful for. He drove me to the nearest town, a place called Ridgemont, population 1,200, with a gas station and a diner and a small motel. Here's where I made the decision that shaped everything that came after. I didn't call the police. I know that's the thing everyone asks. It's the thing I've asked myself 100 times since, but I need you to understand where my head was in that moment. I had no proof of anything. My husband hadn't technically committed a crime I could name. He drove away. That's not illegal. And we were in the middle of marital problems. If I walked into a police station in a town I didn't know and said my husband abandoned me at a lake cabin, what would happen? They would call him. He would say we had a fight and I overreacted and left on my own. He would be calm and believable because he was always calm and believable. And then I would be sent home and nothing would change except that he would know I was onto something. There was also something else. Something I hadn't fully admitted to myself yet. The money. If he had planned this, if this wasn't just a cruel, impulsive act, then there was more happening than I understood. And I needed to understand it before I showed my hand. I used the last of the cash in my jacket pocket to pay for 3 nights at the motel. It wasn't much. The owner, a woman in her 60s who introduced herself only as the manager, took one look at me and my blistered feet and ruined clothes and didn't ask for ID. She just handed me a key and said the vending machine at the end of the hall had coffee. I spent 2 weeks in Ridgemont. I found a short-term waitressing job at the diner, cash under the table. I didn't tell anyone my real name. I told myself it was temporary, that I was thinking, that I was building a plan. But honestly, part of it was fear. Not fear of being found. Fear of going back. Fear of going back. Fear of what I would discover if I started pulling the real threads. The months that followed were the strangest of my life. I moved twice, stayed in 2 different towns, worked jobs that paid cash. I was not hiding from the police. I was hiding from the version of my life that I couldn't yet face. I called my sister from a payphone in November. The only payphone I'd seen in years, outside a laundromat in a town called Millfield. I don't know what I was going to say, but she answered on the second ring, and before I could speak, she started crying and said my name, and I stood there in the cold outside that laundromat and listened to her cry for a full minute before I said, quietly, "I'm okay." She gasped. Then she said, "They told us you drowned." I held the phone very still. "What?" "He said you went out on the dock alone at night and you fell in. They searched the lake. They never found a body." Her voice was shaking. "We had a memorial service 3 weeks ago." I couldn't speak. I thought about him standing at a memorial service, probably in a dark suit, probably saying the right things, probably crying at exactly the right moments. He was always so good at saying the right things. "Don't tell anyone you called me," I said. "Please, not yet." "What? Why?" "You need to come home. You need to." "I will. I promise. But not yet. Please, just trust me." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "He's already been to Dad's attorney. About the estate." There it was. The thing I had suspected but hadn't let myself fully believe. He hadn't just abandoned me. He had planned a story. A body that conveniently couldn't be found. A grieving widower moving quickly to settle financial matters. And he had done it all while wearing the face of a devoted husband. I spent 2 more months preparing. My sister became my secret. She started quietly gathering information, reporting back in careful fragments. She confirmed that the joint savings account had been zeroed out the day after he reported me missing. She found out that I had a life insurance policy I hadn't known about, taken out 18 months into our marriage, with him as sole beneficiary. $300,000. She found out through a mutual acquaintance that he had been seeing someone for over a year. A woman who lived 30 minutes from her house. Someone we had both met at a neighborhood event. Someone I had sat next to at a dinner party and listened to talk about her garden. I also had a conversation with my sister about what to do next, and the answer we came to together was not the police. Not yet. Because we didn't have anything concrete. Not a recording, not a document, nothing that couldn't be explained away by a good attorney. He was charming and presentable, and he had already established a narrative. I had learned from watching him that the story told first is the hardest to undo. So we decided to wait for the right moment. My sister called me in February. Her voice was flat and controlled in a way that meant she was holding something difficult. She told me that he and the woman had gotten engaged, that they were planning a small ceremony at the house, our house, in April, that his mother was flying in from Portland, that mutual friends were already receiving invitations. I sat with that information for a long time. I thought about anger. I felt it, don't mistake me. It was there, and it was enormous. But underneath the anger was something colder and more useful. Clarity. I said to my sister, "I'll be there." She started crying again, but this time it wasn't grief. It was something else. April came. My sister had gotten me every piece of documentation we could gather. Text messages between him and the woman that she had photographed from a mutual friend's phone, a bank statement showing the withdrawals, a copy of the life insurance policy, a voicemail he had left her early in the timeline that said things I won't repeat here but that made the picture very clear. I drove into Denver on a Saturday morning. I parked 2 blocks from the house and sat in the car and looked at my own hands for a while. Then I got out. The ceremony was in the backyard. I had forgotten that I still had the gate code from when we moved in, a 4-digit number he had never thought to change because as far as he knew, I was at the bottom of Lake Garner. I walked in through the side gate and stood at the back of the small gathering, and for a moment nobody noticed me. Then a woman near the back turned, a friend of mine from years ago, who I hadn't seen in 2 years, and her face went through about 6 different expressions in the space of 3 seconds before she made a sound that was barely a sound, barely a word, but it was enough. Heads turned. The officiant stopped mid-sentence. My husband looked up. I have thought about that moment many times, what his face did. It wasn't guilt. Not immediately. It was something more like a calculation, a fraction of a second where I watched him assess the situation, weigh his options, decide on a response. That tiny pause told me more about who he was than 2.5 years of marriage had. Then he said my name. Soft, almost gentle, like I was a confused guest who had wandered in from the wrong party. "How are you here?" he said. "I walked in through the gate," I said. "You never changed the code." Someone in the gathering started crying. I didn't look to see who. "She's not well," he said, turning slightly toward the guests, using that reasonable, measured voice. "She's been struggling. We've all been so worried." He was already doing it, already constructing the narrative in real time, already building the story that made me the problem, the fragile, unstable woman who showed up at her ex-husband's wedding. "The lake," I said. "You want to tell everyone about the lake?" His jaw tightened, just slightly. That was new. He usually had better control than that. "Tell them," I said. "Tell them how I drowned." Murmurs moved through the small crowd. I saw his mother's face, confused and frightened, looking between the two of us. I reached into my jacket and took out my phone. I had one recording in particular. I wanted them to hear. My sister had sent it to me 2 weeks before. He had left her a voicemail in October, 4 months after the lake, telling her that he was doing okay, that he had been through so much, that he was moving forward. And then at the end of the message, clearly not realizing he was still recording, he said to someone else in the room, a voice I recognized immediately, "She's really gone this time. Everything's going to plan." I pressed play and held the phone up. The backyard was completely silent. Not politely quiet. Completely silent, the way a room goes silent when something real breaks through. He moved toward me, fast, but 2 people stepped between us before he reached me, men I didn't even know. Strangers who had been seated on the left side of the gathering, who had maybe just been at a backyard ceremony 5 minutes ago and now found themselves doing something entirely different. I looked past him to the woman he was supposed to be marrying. She was standing very still by the archway they had decorated with white flowers, and her expression wasn't anger or shock, it was something I recognized. It was the same expression I'd had in that first long minute by the lake before my brain caught up with what was real. She was putting something together, something she had not let herself put together before. Within 40 minutes there were 2 police officers in the backyard. I had made a report in March, carefully timed, when I had documentation in hand. The officers already had a case number. They already knew my name. When he tried to tell them I was unstable, one of the officers quietly told him that was not the issue they were there to discuss. He was arrested 3 days later. Insurance fraud. Attempted fraud, rather, since the life insurance had not yet paid out. Additionally, there was an investigation opened into the circumstances of the lake. It's ongoing. His attorney calls it circumstantial. Mine does not. The house sold. My grandmother's money is the subject of ongoing legal proceedings, and I have been advised not to discuss the specifics. I moved back to Ohio for 3 months and slept in my childhood bedroom and let my mother feed me soup even though I'm almost 30 and can feed myself perfectly well. It's okay to let people take care of you when you've been running alone for a long time. There are things I think about now, in the quieter moments. I think about the woman who stood under that flower arch and looked at me with that expression of delayed understanding. She reached out to me once, through a mutual acquaintance, and I haven't responded yet. I'm not sure what I would say. I don't believe she knew everything. I believe she knew enough and chose not to look too closely, which is different, and I'm still deciding how I feel about it. I think about the version of myself that existed before the lake, the one who moved money into a joint account without a second thought, the one who explained away every quiet alarm. She wasn't naive exactly, or I don't want to believe that. She was trusting in a way that felt like a virtue and turned out to be a liability. I'm still working out the difference. I have a new apartment. Small, on the 3rd floor, faces east, so I get the morning light. I have a deadbolt and a separate savings account, and I have started, slowly, trusting my own instincts again. That last part is the hardest. When someone teaches you not to trust yourself, unlearning it takes longer than you think. He looked at me like I was nothing on that dock. He drove away and left me in the dark and went home to build a story about a woman who drowned. He thought that was the end of it. He thought I was someone who could be disappeared. He was wrong about that, and now everybody knows it. I've had a lot of time to think about what actually went wrong, not what he did. That part is clear. But what I allowed to happen slowly, over time, without noticing, When I look back at who I was before that lake, I see someone who had made a quiet habit of not trusting herself. Every time I felt uneasy and explained it away, I was practicing that habit. Every time I handed over something precious, money, autonomy, the benefit of the doubt, without asking a single hard question, I was getting better at ignoring my own instincts. He didn't create that in me. I had built it long before he arrived. He just recognized it and used it. That's the part that took me the longest to sit with, because it would be easier to make the whole story about him, about what a calculated, cold person he turned out to be. And he was. What he did at that lake, what he planned for months beforehand, the insurance policy, the story about drowning, showing up composed and grieving at a memorial for a woman he had tried to get rid of. That is a particular kind of cruelty that I don't have a word for. But if I make the story only about him, I learn nothing, and I paid too high a price to walk away with nothing. What I know now is that integrity, real integrity, not the performative kind, is something you practice in small moments, not just big ones. He practiced deception in small moments for years before that night. A little dishonesty here, a little manipulation there, each one so minor that it barely registered. And I practiced self-abandonment in small moments too. A little dismissed instinct here, a little willful blindness there. We were both building toward something. We just didn't end up in the same place. The thing about intelligence, actual useful intelligence, the kind that protects you, is that it has to be turned inward as much as outward. I was smart about a lot of things. I was good at my job. I read people well in professional settings. But I had a blind spot the size of a house when it came to my own life, my own choices, my own quiet compromises. Real discernment means asking hard questions about the things you most want to believe. That's the harder skill. That's the one I'm still developing. And then there's the matter of what it takes to survive something like that shed in the woods, the 2-week diner job under a false name, the payphone call to my sister, the 4 months of building a case instead of falling apart. I didn't know I had that in me. I don't think you can know in advance. Resilience isn't a personality trait you're born with. It's a decision you make, over and over, in conditions that make giving up feel completely reasonable. I made it because I had my sister. Because a woman at a motel didn't ask for my ID. Because I was angrier than I was afraid, and I held on to that anger carefully, like a small fire in bad weather. He thought I was someone who could be erased. That tells you something about how he saw me. It also tells you something about how I had learned to see myself. Both of those things had to change. One of them I couldn't control. The other one, I could. That's what I keep coming back to. The part that was mine. The part that still is.